There's a moment during US Open Fan Week that tells you almost everything you need to know about Eala's growing presence in tennis. And it doesn't happen during a match. It happens beside a practice court at Flushing Meadows. A woman is standing 3 people deep behind the fence, holding her phone high above her head just to catch a few seconds of a rally she can barely see. She didn't come to New York looking for Eala. According to the source account, she had originally planned to watch Carlos Alcaraz practice. Then she heard the noise coming from another court and followed it. That noise led her to Court 5, where Eala was practicing. And surrounding the young Filipina wasn't simply a crowd of excited supporters. There was a visible security presence around her. That detail matters, because Eala entered this US Open ranked number 18 in the source material, and players around that ranking generally aren't treated like the biggest superstars on the grounds. They get their coach, their hitting partner, their team, and enthusiastic fans. What Eala appeared to be receiving looked closer to headliner treatment. So the real question isn't simply why Eala has so many fans. We already know she has an enormous and passionate Filipino following. The more interesting question is why the infrastructure around the US Open appears to be treating her like a player whose commercial profile is already much higher than her ranking suggests. Fan Week is where that question becomes fascinating. Before the main draw takes over the tournament, the US Open has several days where fans can enter the grounds, watch practices, attend events, and experience the tournament environment. On the surface, it feels casual. Behind the scenes, however, almost everything requires a decision. Which practices get streamed? Which athletes appear in special exhibitions? Where does security go? Which cultural programs receive space on the schedule? None of those things simply happen. Resources have to be allocated. And when several of those decisions begin pointing toward the same athlete, it becomes worth paying attention. Start with where Eala actually stood entering the tournament. According to the supplied material, she was 20 years old and had reached a career-high WTA ranking of number 18 as of August 24, 2026. She was in the US Open main draw through direct entry, not because of a wild card and not because she had fought through qualifying. Her ranking had earned her the position. Earlier in the summer, she had captured her first tour-level singles title at the Mubadala City DC Open, giving her a significant hardcourt trophy shortly before New York. She had also continued competing successfully in Toronto, including a third-round appearance referenced in the source. So she wasn't arriving at Flushing Meadows based purely on hype. She had results behind her, and the crowd phenomenon surrounding her had been building before New York. The source notes that Tennis Channel had already highlighted the attention around her at Indian Wells the previous year. What changed at this US Open was the scale of the institutional response. Consider the security. The source says Eala moved around the Billie Jean King National Tennis Center during Fan Week, surrounded by security personnel, and it connects that precaution to a crowd-related incident she had previously discussed from the Australian Open. That changes how we should interpret the scene. Security isn't there merely because somebody wants Eala to look important. If the account is accurate, it reflects an operational judgment about managing the attention surrounding her. Popularity becomes a different kind of phenomenon when tournament organizers have to plan around it. Once crowds affect how a player moves through a venue, how close supporters can get, and how staff manage access, that athlete's popularity is no longer just something you hear in the stands. It becomes a logistical factor. Then look at broadcasting. The source says the US Open's official YouTube operation live-streamed Eala practicing with Elena Gabriela Ruse ahead of the main draw. Think about what a live-streamed practice actually represents. The tournament has dozens of players hitting balls all over the grounds. It cannot professionally package every warm-up session. Cameras, graphics, production resources, distribution, and promotion go toward athletes organizers believe people want to watch. The source compares that kind of exposure with treatment normally associated with established headliners such as Arna Sabalenka, Carlos Alcaraz, Coco Gauff, Novak Djokovic, and Iga Swiatek. Eala being included in that environment is another signal that somebody believes her audience extends beyond what number 18 beside her name might suggest. Then comes the stars of the Open exhibition. According to the source, Eala was included in the August 27th event at Arthur Ashe Stadium alongside a carefully selected group of recognizable and emerging players. Arthur Ashe Stadium isn't some side court tucked away in the corner of the grounds. It is the centerpiece of the US Open, a venue with more than 23,000 seats. Putting a player into a ticketed Fan Week showcase there means attaching that player's name to something the tournament wants people to care about. Again, this doesn't prove Eala is already commercially bigger than every player ranked ahead of her. It does show that the tournament considers her valuable enough to feature prominently. And then there is a fourth detail that makes the overall picture even more interesting. The source says Fan Week programming included a Filipino traditional dance performance on Fountain Plaza, alongside cultural programming representing Chinese, Japanese, Thai, Indian, and other communities. On its own, that doesn't prove anything specifically about Eala. New York is one of the most culturally diverse cities in the world, and the US Open naturally has reasons to celebrate the communities that make up its audience. But when Filipino cultural programming happens during the same week that a Filipino player is drawing unusually large attention around the grounds, it adds another layer to the atmosphere surrounding her rise. Put these pieces together: security planning, official practice coverage, an Arthur Ashe exhibition appearance, and Filipino cultural visibility during Fan Week. None of those alone makes Eala a future world number one. Together, however, they suggest that the tournament recognizes something significant happening around her. And that brings us to the biggest misconception about athlete popularity. We tend to assume crowds follow rankings. A player starts winning, moves from number 50 to num. 20, then eventually into the top 10, and the audience grows in roughly the same order. But markets don't always move that neatly. Sometimes the audience arrives before the ranking catches up. Rankings tell us what somebody has already accomplished on court. Audience demand tells us what people want to see right now. Those measurements can point in different directions. With Eala, according to this source's argument, that gap is becoming impossible to ignore. She may officially be number 18, but her visibility around Fan Week resembles that of a much more established attraction. That doesn't mean the USTA secretly believes she is literally the third best player in the world. That would be taking the comparison too far. What it means is that tournament organizers appear to recognize unusually strong interest around her and are responding accordingly. And the most compelling evidence might be something much simpler than live streams or exhibition rosters: Fan Week access itself. The source emphasizes that much of Fan Week is free with the appropriate access pass. That matters because fans arriving on the grounds have choices. They can move between courts. They can watch established champions practice. They can explore the grounds, attend activities, eat, shop, or simply follow whichever crowd sounds exciting. When someone who originally came to see Alcaraz hears another practice court erupting and decides to follow the noise, that is a tiny consumer decision. One person doesn't mean much. But repeat that behavior hundreds or thousands of times, and suddenly organizers can see where attention is moving. That's where Eala's appeal becomes bigger than a simple Filipino diaspora story. Filipino supporters are obviously central to her atmosphere. They bring flags, chants, energy, and a level of national pride that makes her matches distinctive. But the next stage of stardom begins when people outside that built-in community start becoming curious too. The woman holding her phone over the crowd is therefore an interesting symbol. She didn't arrive as an Eala supporter. Something happening around Eala made her stop anyway. That is how crossover appeal begins. It's also why the security element carries more weight than it might seem at first. Once an athlete draws enough attention that crowd management becomes part of the conversation, tournaments have to think differently. Practice locations matter more. Routes through the grounds matter more. Media access becomes more complicated. Scheduling decisions can become more sensitive. None of that is glamorous for the player herself. In fact, the source makes an important point. Extreme visibility can come with a personal cost. A 20-year-old athlete still needs to train, recover, concentrate, and live some version of a normal professional life, while increasingly becoming the center of public attention. That is why it would be irresponsible to turn this into a prediction that Eala is guaranteed to dominate the US Open. Nothing described here proves she will win the tournament. It doesn't prove she will reach the quarterfinals, semifinals, or even the second week. It also doesn't establish that her practice crowds were larger than Sabalenka's or any other specific superstars. The source itself warns against making those unsupported comparisons. Crowd sizes at separate practices aren't being measured like official match attendance, and tennis remains brutally unpredictable. One difficult matchup can end a tournament quickly. Rankings can rise and fall, momentum disappears, players get tired, draws can be unforgiving. What we can discuss is what already happened before Eala's first main draw match. The tournament environment was responding to her differently. The US Open was putting cameras on her practice. She was being included in a marquee exhibition. Security resources were being used around her. Fans were gathering even when there wasn't a match to watch. That is significant because commercial momentum often becomes visible before sporting achievement reaches its eventual peak. Sponsors, broadcasters, tournament organizers, and media companies are constantly trying to identify who audiences will care about next. Waiting until someone becomes world number one can mean arriving too late. The smartest move is recognizing the trajectory before everybody else does. Whether Eala fulfills that trajectory is still entirely up to what happens on the tennis court. But she has already moved into a different category of attention. She isn't simply a young player hoping somebody notices her anymore. People are already looking for her. Cameras are already following her. Fans are already organizing around her. Tournament operations are already accounting for the crowds surrounding her, and perhaps most importantly, people who didn't arrive intending to watch Alex Eala are beginning to stop and watch anyway. That is the part that should get the tennis world's attention. Her number 18 ranking tells us where her results have taken her so far. Fan Week tells us something different. How much curiosity and emotional investment already exist around her. The next question can only be answered on court. Can Eala make her results catch up with the enormous expectations developing around her? Maybe she will, maybe she won't. That uncertainty is exactly why the US Open is so compelling. But one thing about this fan week already feels clear from the source material. Alex Eala arrived in New York as the world number 18, yet the attention surrounding her looked far bigger than a number beside her name. And when a woman who came to see another superstar follows the noise across Flushing Meadows and ends up fighting for a glimpse of Eila's practice, you may be watching the earliest stage of something rankings alone cannot measure.